welcome to episode 24 of React Native Radio. I'm your host, Peter Pikarczyk, and we also have Lee Johnson.
How's it going?
Scott Kyle.
Aloha from Molokai.
And Tim Anglade.
And bonjour from France.
So, Scott and Tim, would you guys like to start just by introducing yourselves and letting us know what you all do?
I guess I'll start. I'm Scott, and I have been working on the Realm React Native binding for maybe the past 6 months or so. And before that, co-founded a startup that worked on, we did software for Wi-Fi routers. So a whole different kind of thing. But I've worked at Apple prior to that. And so I've been kind of bouncing around doing lots of different stuff and enjoying every minute of it.
Cool. And I'm Tim. I'm overseeing product at Realm, and I've been with them for about 2.5 years. Some dark ages when we were called something else, doing something else as a startup, to being called Realm, launching for Objective-C, Swift, Java, Android, and then most recently React Native. And then before that, I did a bunch of different things around NoSQL, distributed systems. I kind of came from that background. And started out in web originally, so I'm kind of coming back to JavaScript after a long hiatus. So that's kind of my backstory.
Cool. All right. So you piqued my interest with your 3-year. I didn't realize you guys were around that long, and in the Dark Ages comments. So, so what happened?
I kind of laid it out there.
Yeah. I'd love to hear the story of how that all transpired.
Sure. Yeah. So we used to be called TypeDB, which was a bad name on a certain number of levels. But we were doing something, very similar, right? And the technology hadn't changed all too much, but we were doing like more of an embedded database. So really kind of like, pound for pound type of replacement for SQLite. As I said, technology didn't change all that much, but we were much more focused on disk space and raw speed and a bunch of advanced features, which you couldn't really quite do with SQLite if you were into embedded systems, embedded devices, or kind of low-level programming. So the company was really kind of founded and shepherded by a bunch of C++ dudes, and was kind of like a developer's database type of ideal to it. And so we kind of decided around early 2014 to kind of focus more specifically on mobile, which was the founders' kind of first dream anyway. They both came out of Nokia, and they both had worked for a long time on kind of old mobile and new mobile. And they originally started kind of building a database for mobile way back when they founded the company in 2000. In the late 2000, early 2010s. But, a lot of the investors had told them that nobody needed a mobile database. So they had kind of gone in a different direction. So we kind of took it back to the start, really focused it on kind of what mobile was today, right? In the iPhone, kind of Android world, and really focused on the Realm you see today, which is this really easy to use, mobile database that has like a first-party integration into your language of choice, right? So Objective-C, Swift, Java, and then specifically now JavaScript and React Native. So that's kind of the detour that we took towards kind of building what it is today, and kind of how you always end up kind of doing what you thought of in the first place anyway.
Cool. So it'd be nice if you could give us some kind of just overview of Realm feature set and use cases, because what's cool about it is React Native is new, and Objective-C and Xcode projects obviously have core data, and Android has their database. So it's a kind of a unique thing too for React Native. It's something that's kind of specific to that environment that we don't have a lot of options for. So you guys are pretty new to the scene for an actual database in React Native that makes it easier to use than writing bridges to core data or something crazy like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so let's talk a bit about kind of Realm, and then we can talk maybe in more detail about like what Realm for React Native is. So Realm is kind of the umbrella term, the name of the company. It's also the name of the product that we kind of have for each platform. And so in general, in its raw form, Realm is this really easy to use, really fast replacement for your data model layer, right? Including persistence, including relationship, including querying, everywhere you would use like a model in your app, you kind of use a Realm object. And, the basic principles of it is to try to build a modern data model if you were trying to rebuild SQLite today, right? So it's easy to use, right? I think that's kind of what most developers need at this point. They really need something that doesn't take a lot of time, right? When you're developing your application and when trying to maintain it and find a bug. We're trying to do something that's really, really fast because, you don't want to be slowed down by, an ORM or database queries and having to optimize that. We try to maintain a really advanced feature set, like, encryption's built in, graph queries built in, easy migrations, nice reactive notification system. And we try to do so kind of in the open. So we develop everything we can on GitHub. We support everybody directly on GitHub, Stack Overflow, or Twitter, or by email. And, we've tried to build like a large kind of trusted community around it. So we're now running on like the alpha billion devices around the world, which is pretty nice. And then we're using some really large apps, on the Objective-C Swift Java side. We just came out in JavaScript, but we're seeing some good adoption. But on the old kind of products, we're already used by Google, Amazon, Starbucks, eBay, Budweiser, BBC, McDonald's, Walmart, a bunch of logos you can find on our website. So that's kind of Realm in general. So Realm for React Native is kind of reinvention of that product specifically for the platform. So we don't really do bindings in a strict sense, of like, oh, let's just take this thing we built and just expose the API directly into whatever language we have to deal with. We really try to start every new product thinking about what is that product trying to do? What is the platform trying to do, right? What is the framework behind trying to do? What are its design principles, and how can we fit in there very, very, very well? And so we spend an enormous amount of time, literally, dozens of months kind of launching every product specifically for that community. So if you look at our Swift product, it's really drastically different from our Android product in terms of the API it exposes, the query language it has, a lot of things like that. And even if you look at our Swift product versus our Objective-C product, they're also very, very different, even though they both target the iOS platform. So, our React Native and JavaScript product is no different. We're really trying to build something that is very first party, that feels native to JavaScript, that feels like you're interacting with a standard component of the React Native ecosystem. And the jury's still as to whether or not we succeed in that, right? So we're always looking for feedback and everything we're doing wrong and kind of improvements. But it's kind of really just kind of an application of our basic design principles around data models, around concurrency, around consistency and handling different copies of data that are flowing around your app, but also applying all these things to what's idiomatic to JavaScript and React Native. So we came out with Realm for React Native very recently. We actually launched at ReactConf this year. And we're lucky to have some users like TaskRabbit already using us in production for a while, for a few months actually, since before we even launched publicly. And adoption's been pretty good so far. We're still in the early days, but we're in the hundreds of users already after a few weeks, and we're growing about 15-20% every week. So pretty kind of nice exponential growth and nice pickup in the Realm community, in the React Native community. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Do you have a particular client or customer or app type that you think would most benefit from Realm, or is it just kind of anything?
We really try to design this for any app, and for if you need a data model that we basically feel like you should be able to use Realm. And specifically, I think on a more relatively new ecosystem, like the React Native ecosystem, that doesn't have a very strong integration with SQLite like Android does, or doesn't have a very strong framework like Core Data on iOS. We really feel like there's very few kind of reason why you maybe shouldn't consider Realm for React Native. I say this because there's a lot of trust and kind of safety built into using the first party option in every ecosystem, right? And definitely there's a lot of reason why if you're on iOS you might still want to stick with Core Data, or if you're doing native Android, that you may want to use the built-in SQLite functions. But, for React Native, there's kind of not a really nice, clean, like first party persistent solution that has the kind of nice semantics that we do and has a performance that we do. And so unless you're really happy with key value storage, we think that, you should probably give Realm a look. And again, if you don't think we hold that promise, we stay true to that promise, and we really would like your feedback and see how we can do that. The specific use cases that tend to kind of really trigger people using us, and if you need kind of to use data offline, that's a good one. If you need to do like complex querying, complex relationship between your objects, that's another kind of reason to think about it. If you need like a lot of support, first party support from a company, and not just kind of community answers or open source projects, that's another. There's a bunch of different reasons to consider Realm, but in terms of what apps, we really feel like we really try to design something that should be usable by any app, whether you need offline or not, whether you need complex queries or not, no matter what kind of business or application you're building.
Cool. That's awesome. So if you don't mind me asking, how are you guys going to make money? Because it looks like Realm is free, which is amazing. But like, what are your plans for the future? Like offering like an enterprise package or?
Yeah, so I mean, we've already generated revenue, kind of selling some, both services and also like products around Realm, like licenses to a large company that need it. And so our basic kind of business model isn't dissimilar to, let's say, like GitHub, something like that, where a large part of the product, 90% plus the product ends up going away for free. But it also helps us kind of build a community and build a standard on which we can upsell a small portion of the population to specific services or product that a large corporation would need. So we're looking to be a bit more public about what those offerings are. In the next few months, we're actually kind of still learning a lot as to what people want to do on top of Realm and what specifically big corporations want out of Realm. And it's taken us a long time to kind of refine that understanding into nice kind of package product with nice names and nice messages around them. So doing that while also kind of taking care of launching all these new platforms and doing all the support around that has kind of been a bit of a slow ordeal, but we're going to have more announcement on that front, in the next few months. The basic thing, so for others, I should mention, because I always kind of assume people have read the website, but yeah, so we're free to use. All of our high level code, all of our JavaScript code, right, in the case of React Native, is free and open source, Apache 2 on GitHub, and then we've committed to kind of keeping that open source and to maintaining it, right? So it's not going to be a case of like what you're using today is going to be paid all of a sudden. Like everything that's open on GitHub will stay open on GitHub, and will also kind of be actively contributed to and expanded. So that's kind of the basic promise of the business model. And I should clarify that before I forget.
Yeah, it's definitely, for everyone listening, free to use and free to start using today. Cool. There are definitely a couple key features that I really love. I want to dig into it shortly, but I just have a question about the code base for the JavaScript versus the iOS side for React Native or Android side. Is it a SQLite under the covers with a bridge, or did you guys rewrite something completely different? I mean, how is that orchestrated, and could this ever develop into like a node package?
Yeah, I mean, so I can take the first part of that, and maybe Scott, you can expand a little bit. So the basics that we don't use SQLite. We're not an ORM, and we're not built on stuff with SQLite. So that's kind of a big difference from like virtually every other persistent option out there. We're not built on LevelDB or any other kind of key value store either. We're built on our own like underlying storage engine, which is a part of Realm that's not open source. And right now, in full kind of disclaimer, is something that we're looking to open source, but it just kind of keeps getting backlogged with everything else. But so we're built on our own underlying storage system right now. That's going to go Apache 2, same thing in the next few months. And that is not strictly speaking a relational database. It's kind of a mix between a relational database and an object database. And that powers a lot of the high level feature that you see, right? So the reason why we're able to give you like a native JavaScript interface with really nice object and this nice relationship model and fast query and everything else is because we have our own storage underneath. Allows us to do a lot of really nice things like an MVCC type storage underneath, kind of like Git, but for your data objects. Allows us to do a lot of like zero copy things. Give us a really nice threading model, which isn't terribly useful, of course, in the case of React Native, but we hope that kind of might change in other platforms. and then a lot of different things. So it's kind of a replacement for SQLite underneath. And the higher level is kind of a replacement for an ORM, but it's not exactly what's happening, right? So there's some major differences. Like an ORM will take a copy of your data out of the database, and so that's really bad for consistency. That's really bad for resource usage. That's really bad for speed. So whereas Realm kind of has those two separate layers as well, kind of a SQLite layer and kind of an ORM layer, but they're actually integrated to work together. And so we don't copy data in and out. We give you kind of complete consistency. Everything is kind of memory mapped all the way down. And we get huge performance savings, huge ease of use improvements, and huge consistency improvements by having those two layers really tightly integrated together as opposed to the SQLite and ORM combo. So I don't know if there's anything that I kind of missed or you want to add there, Scott.
No, just that, like what Tim said, a huge, portion of the Realm language bindings are shared between all the platforms and are written in C++, both that core storage layer that he was talking about, and then another layer on top of it that provides many of the facilities that all the language bindings need. And then we just kind of specialize on top of that for each language, like with Swift, Objective-C, Java. They all require their own custom kind of integration points, and we have this intermediary layer where we can make that really easy, and we're constantly improving that as well. And we use that for Realm React Native as well. And like what Tim said, the objects that you pull out of the database are, they're not copied out. They're, you're just always looking at kind of accessors to the data that's in the database. So we can do lots of different kinds of operations very, very quickly that are sometimes very slow with ORMs because they have to make many queries to the database, whereas we don't really need to make many queries. We can kind of do it all in one shot when the user needs it.
Yeah, and that's a specific example maybe that are good to kind of give people a concrete example, right? So a lot of the time, if you come from kind of that SQLite or that ORM background, you kind of have this idea of like you do a query and that's just kind of like a representation, like a projection of your data really. And if you want to edit the object, you kind of have to do a separate thing and then kind of find the object and edit it. And with Realm, you don't have to worry about that. Like any time you get a query, all you get is like the actual objects, and you can just modify them in line, for example. And again, anytime you access any value in Realm, you're not accessing some sort of derivative or projection or copy of it. You're accessing the raw data itself. With some, minor asterisk for consistency and refresh loops and stuff like that, right? This is kind of a bit of a simplified view, but
we have
nice access to everything.
Yeah, we still have transactions. So when you do make modifications to your database, you do that inside of a transaction. So if anything does go wrong, like an exception is thrown, or even if the app itself crashed for some reason, your data should remain consistent because that transaction would not have been committed. So, besides for that, making all your mutations inside a transaction, we try to keep the objects as, like their native, objects. Like with JavaScript, most of the Realm objects that you use, they just act like native JavaScript objects or arrays or whatever. So it's really easy to use and integrate and even pass around Realm objects into other libraries that are, not even expecting a Realm object to be able to, act on them.
Right. And then, another quick thing to drop in there and as another example of like, the interesting aspect of like building our own core and integration thereof is that we get to really apply a lot of reactive patterns directly into the design. Not in a very kind of functional type of sense. We're not doing like streams and all that kind of stuff, but we have this really nice ability to just kind of let you, work very synchronously, get notified of changes that are happening. We're doing more and more work there. So this is especially raw on the React Native side, where we still have to build in, I think, queries to start with. But the basic promise of the underlying engine and one that you can see in the other products that we're developing for Swift Objective-C, and that's on its way to React Native, is kind of the ability to follow a lot of really nice reactive patterns where you just kind of subscribe to updates and are able to modify your UI when the underlying data changes very, very easily. So all that stuff would be, many people have tried. It's really hard to build on top of SQLite or a key value store. And so it's kind of one of the nice things of being able to start fresh and build on their own foundation.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and that actually brings up one of the features I was talking about is the auto-updating results, which you even have for the React Native client, which is pretty awesome, especially considering with JavaScript and iOS with its restrictions on some of the WebSockets and things. Like, for example, in iOS, you're kind of restricted on how you can do those kind of notifications for anything. So how does that work? And could you explain the auto updating a little bit and how it ties in? You also have a custom list view, especially for React Native, and how those could maybe be used together to even show auto updating of a list view.
Right. So, like we were talking about, when you make like a query into a realm, you're kind of getting a view on that query that you made, and so when you try to access, objects inside that, that results, that's when the actual query is made. And if something in the realm changes that would affect that query, then, that query would get automatically updated. So when you try to access objects out of that results again, it would give you, a live representation of what, the state of the realm is at that moment. And so we have these, change notifications, and unfortunately right now they're not, super granular. So, if you make a change to your realm, you'll get a notification, but coming really, really soon, you'll be able to get, a change, directly on a query that you made. So for instance, if you have a list view, so like we have our own custom list view that would tie in with this very nicely. You can, get a notification that something in that results changed, so you can re-render the list view. Right now, we would re-render it, on any change, just for right now. But it's made to, do that very efficiently because nothing's changed. So our custom list view is, it's not actually, necessary to use to integrate, Realm with a list view. It's just exists to make it extra fast. So to support, like for our own test purposes, we have a, little app with a list view with like 1 million items in it, and you can scroll through it and delete them and see them get deleted like immediately. And using the stock list view, you could still use Realm with it, but it would be a bit slower because of how it, the certain assumptions that it makes. So that's kind of why we built that, is just to make it extra easy and extra fast to use, Realm queries or Realm lists inside, a list view in your app.
Right. So the basic promise of what we're building, and that's kind of coming into React Native very quickly, is like, let's say you have a part of your UI that just says like depend on a counter, like the number of items that match a query, and you just want that in a tooltip or some sort of counter badge or something like that. That you can just kind of subscribe to whether or not the results of this query have changed in any way, and then in the handler for that notification, you just kind of recompute and redraw your UI. And the count itself you don't need to rerun the query. You don't need to do anything because the count, itself will have updated automatically. So it's super straightforward to do like a lot of your basic UI changes, again, in a very, very nice and reactive way. And it's pretty painless. You don't need to set out a lot of boilerplate code. You don't need to think about the consistency of your data or what kind of situation you're in. It just kind of always works, and it feels pretty native and fluid with the JavaScript syntax. So we're pretty excited about it. It's pretty raw, but you can take a look at the other bindings and see what's going to drop in React Native very, very soon. As soon as we get done fixing some of these like early bugs we found and support issues from the community.
And I'd like to kind of add just on that really quick, is that like this is kind of ties back in with what Tim was talking about, how, we have certain advantages by not, just building on top of SQLite. And like one of those is that deep integration from like the core storage layer. So, when we do integrate those notifications that are more fine grained, we won't just get, a message that something changed. We'll be able to get a message that, exactly what changed. So, when updating UI components, knowing exactly what changed means you have to do a lot less, recomputing diffs and, trying to figure out for yourself what changed. So it, again, would just let you build an app that's a little bit more performant.
Right. And I think it's just important to understand about kind of the general design patterns we have behind this. We don't really talk about, how we're building the product, why we're building all that much. We tend to kind of talk a lot about other things and other libraries we like and other projects we like on our blog. But we really kind of fully buy into reactive patterns. And, I remember talking about that with Alexander, one of our founders, and kind of how he was pushing that stuff, when I first met him in 2013. And back when, like, not very, very many people were super eager to talk about that. And, it's kind of been driving the design of what we've been doing, at TypeDB before even Realm and definitely to that Realm. So whenever you're wondering about what kind of database we're building, what kind of framework we're building, you can kind of pretty much expect us to follow, just reactive patterns in everything we do.
How do you guys handle like async states or, loading indicators or anything similar to that?
Right. So with, right now, when you query a Realm in Realm React Native, we only support synchronous queries. Just for right now, async is coming pretty soon. But generally speaking, one of the reasons why async hasn't been a priority for us is we don't generally see performance impact, unless you're around 100,000 plus items and also asking them to be sorted in a certain way. For kind of your regular use, standard to-do list for normal people that don't have 100,000 to-dos, you don't, really see much performance impact at all by doing live synchronous queries. So that's why we kind of haven't done that quite yet, but we are working on it. So for databases that are really, really large, you will be able to make asynchronous queries.
Yeah, and I don't know that we've agreed on the design specifically for that yet, but I know in other kind of products we have for Java or for Swift, we kind of let you determine what state your query is in and whether you're still kind of computing results, or whether you have kind of finally computed the results, which makes it easy to update your UI accordingly. But, as Scott said, in practice, this is not a performance bottleneck, which I know kind of flies in the head of a lot of like, quote unquote, best practices for app development, where people kind of tell you to do like all the IO asynchronously. But, a lot of it, we think of those best practices is it's really designed with stuff like SQLite and ORMs in mind, and the performance improvement you get out of something like Realm is actually very, very major, to the point where it's really much closer to accessing like objects in memory than it is to like performing, old school IO like you're used to with SQLite. So, we understand some queries probably still will need to be done asynchronously, but we really recommend people to just enjoy the fact that they don't have to worry about the state of their query and whether it is finished completing for most cases, and can just do a synchronous query.
Well, I know one thing I definitely want to discuss, because it's one of the features that you guys have that really excites me, is the encryption. So, a lot of times, especially with SQLite, for example, because that's what most people are familiar with, it's kind of a pain to get the SQLite cipher and get it set up. And you have data on a device, and devices are getting hacked all the time. It's in the news now with Apple fighting with the government. And we deal with data, and we don't put any student data on mobile devices for that very reason. It's just not worth the risk. But for, say, healthcare applications or anything sensitive, can you kind of walk through the use case and your encryption
So yeah, so definitely agree with the encryption. It's one of those things that we actually had at launch for Android, because we knew it was kind of a big kind of limiting factor on that platform. iOS already had like a lot of built-in encryption of files and all that stuff, so it was pretty good. But Android, for a lot of devices, it was really nice to be able to just do it first party. And so now we can have this encryption feature rolled out across platforms on both iOS and Android, and accessible from React Native, whether you're targeting iOS or Android. And so to be clear, we don't implement our own crypto. We all piggyback on either OpenSSL or Common Crypto, and we just use standard AES 256 algorithm. And so it's really nice. It's really just like accessing any database, any realm you have in your application, but instead of just opening it, you just have to pass the key, I guess, to encrypt it or decrypt it. And the only tricky part is where to store that key. So you have to be sure to kind of either get that key from somewhere secure, from a third-party service, or you have to store it securely on the device. But I believe there's other libraries that kind of let you alias that, across different OSs. So basically, yeah, if you're comfortable kind of storing that key or getting that key from somewhere, Realm makes that encryption part super, super easy for you, and just uses, again, best practice implementation from trusted third-party libraries. So it's definitely been mentioned as something that people kind of like quite a bit, because getting that same level of encryption from other frameworks, especially on React Native, is really cumbersome otherwise.
Yeah, there's a lot of hoops to jump through to get any of that to go, and for you guys, it's literally just setting the key, right? You have a method to create the hash based on your key, and then you pass it. Is that how it works?
Yeah, it's just a 64-byte key, and as long as it's correct, we'll let you open the file. So yeah, we a lot of people use it. I don't have like specific stats on usage, but I'm kind of always amazed because even I don't know much about it. Again, like not healthcare application, e-commerce application, I end up hearing about them using this feature. So because it's just much easier than like relying on kind of platform features or other kind of integrations. So yeah, really enjoying. I'm really glad that we put that in, because it was a bit of a complex implementation task that you can imagine to wire all that in, and we weren't quite sure if it was worth the time we spent, but it seems to be very well received.
So cool. I've got a few more. I was going to give you a chance to jump in there, Peter, but I definitely would like to know about, so you have different object types in your models, and with lists being one of those types. Can you kind of go through that, like the object types that you can have in your models and in your schema and how they're set up, and highlight some of those like list types and object types and different ways you connect data?
Yeah. Sure. So the basic. Oh, do you want to do that, Scott?
Yeah, I can do that.
Go ahead.
No problem. We have, when you define like a schema for an object, for instance, you have a data model of like a person, and you can have kind of your basic primitive types as properties on that person, like string for their name, and like a number for their age, and or like a date even for their birthday. And so we also support relationships. So you can have, for instance, like a partner could be a pointer to another person, for instance, or like we refer to them as references to other persons. And you can have lists. So for instance, you had friends, you could have a list of friends, and inside that list are just references to other persons as well, or to other objects if you had like pets, for instance. So you define all that in your schema, and then when you create those person objects, or you get them out of the realm, when you query for them, you get these objects that will basically behave just like native JavaScript objects. You access a property like a name, and you get back a string, or you access a property called friends, and you get back this list, and the list basically looks and acts as much like an array as we really can make it. It has all your standard array methods, both like for iterating through them, and also for slicing them or pushing new objects onto them. So generally speaking, it will behave as much like an array as we can make it behave. So that's list, and that's kind of why we don't call it array, because we don't want to mislead anyone into thinking it's exactly an array. But generally speaking, it will behave just like an array.
Right. And that name changed a little bit from kind of platform to platform, because we kind of just straight up call it an array when we do Objective-C, or straight up a list when we do it in Java. But it really kind of emulates arrays pretty closely, as Scott mentioned. And the basic idea of it is, again, we always think about like, what if you just had to model your data with just regular JavaScript objects, right? How would you kind of make that happen? And we try to give you a realm model that are as close to that as possible, something you can kind of very intuitively understand, where you're going to declare like your own kind of standard properties, and you're going to want to link objects to each other by just referencing them. And when an object references multiple other objects, like a person having many cats, then you're going to use an array to do that. And so that syntax, we want it to be very intuitive. Like, we don't treat you have to worry about like schemas and abstract types that are not native to your language, or any other complexities there are, right? You can just kind of change things as if they were just regular objects.
Yes. So you mentioned the pointer to the actual object. And so we have document stores like Mongo where things are nested and it gets really difficult to normalize. And you have relational databases like in anything Postgres, where the relationships can get really complex and they're kind of overkill for a mobile application. So you guys are some kind of blend between the two?
Yeah, it's a bit more of a mix between a relational database and an object database. So this is part where it gets really tricky, and I'm kind of simplifying drastically, and then Scott might hit me over the head if he was in the same country or even the same continent I was. But the short idea of it is like, underneath, your data is really like in tables, right? It has row, we have columns, like this column have types. Everything is kind of needs to be stored in this like platform independent format, right? So if you write that realm data from React Native, you can go ahead and like open it from like Swift to, like at the same moment, concurrently, for example, if from your app, if you wanted to, in both languages would be able to read and write the same file. But that data is really kind of always automatically mapped to an object. And so when you reference another object from an object, it's just kind of a pointer to that other table that contains, the row that has the columns for the object that you want. So it kind of has this nice property of letting you kind of do very expressive things like a document model, but without the overhead of like your rows, of a single document with nested subdocument becoming like, very, very large and complex to index or fetch in and out of memory, because we always have independent properties, accessible in memory. And so as we quickly mentioned, it allows us to do like an immense amount of lazy loading. So let's say, for example, you're loading an object that is, graphed to, sequentially to every other object, in your database, right? And goes all the way down, like turtles all the way down. You just kind of link to another object, link to another object. Just because you load that top level object won't load the rest of your graph in memory, right? You won't even load any of their properties until you actually try to access, one of those properties. Because again, everything is just referenced. So it's kind of this nice hybrid kind of storage system that gives you this high level expressive object model, but, with very nice performance, point of like a traditional, let's say, table oriented database. Not strictly speaking relational, like we don't do the real relational algebra and join tables and all that stuff, but it's a table that are rows and columns. So you get to isolate, individual properties, individual values very, very easily, and you have maximal performance there.
Yeah, that's very cool.
I don't think I want to hit you over your head, but we'll see when we get
so
back.
Maybe more like for C++.
That was a very good explanation of that. I'm still trying to.
It was a very deep explanation. It was a good one.
Cool. Yeah, and another thing that makes what you guys are doing unique. We mentioned earlier that it's not a build on top of Level or SQLite, which most things are, but it's something completely unique, not just in React Native, the tool set that we're using, but in just database in general.
Right. And I really like that. I mean, that's actually why I joined the company, a little like over 2 years ago. It's because like, I spent a lot of time in NoSQL, like working on CouchDB, working a little with Cassandra and MongoDB and all the other ones. And honestly, they're really cool projects. And I loved kind of geeking out with, like, say, the React guys and talking about like all the algorithms and all the kind of data models that we're building on top of key value stores and all that cool stuff. But, it was very, very funny because we spent our time in NoSQL and distributed database kind of dealing around the limitation of underlying storage. We only had like so many like stores that we could use, like, DB or like level DB or something like that. And yet we had to kind of expose and express like these very nice kind of document stores or object data models or ORMs on top of that kind of storage. And it was very, very intensely limiting. And it was kind of frustrating after a while that nobody was really investing a lot of time in like fixing the underlying storage. No, I don't mean fixing, but I mean like improving those parts of the underlying storage, because level DB is pretty great for what it's meant for, and all the other stores there too. And I think it was really nice to kind of see people actually tackling kind of those really, really hard problems that nobody's really looked deeply at in an open source kind of way. Basically, SQLite was invented like about 20 years ago. So it was kind of really nice to see some new ideas being mixed in, and it's pretty funny because the thing we always say is like what we're trying to build is what SQLite would be if it was designed today, and in a lot of ways I really think that's true. And I look at kind of the development that SQLite is trying to do in like SQLite 4 and all that stuff, and it's a lot of very, very similar ideas. Not like they're copying us or anything, because that part of the code source is open source yet. But I think we're really thinking alike in terms of pushing for the kind of drastic reinvention of that part of the stack that SQLite really did a great job of pushing and has been doing a great job pushing for. And we're doing so, applied to the new like mobile problem that everybody seems to be having. Scott, is there anything you feel like we should really mention? I feel like we talked about a lot of details, but I may be forgetting a lot of just kind of very basic stuff about Realm and why you should use it.
I mean, you're giving really great in-depth explanations into lots of things. I mean, I feel like, it's worth for everyone to try using it and see how it goes. I think generally it'd be a very positive experience for everyone who does, but I don't have anything specific to add to that.
I'm kind of curious in terms of because you guys support native Android and iOS too, and React Native obviously. What is your user base split like? Are most people coming to you from like a React Native background, or do you find yourself with a lot of native folks as well?
So it's pretty interesting. So on the React Native, it's really too early to tell. The makeup of the audience. We have some anecdotal evidence of like who's coming towards us and why they're coming towards React Native. But on the user base overall, for Realm today, and as I said, React Native just launched like a few weeks ago. So, we're kind of, the portion of the user base on React Native is pretty small. It's growing really, really fast, but it's just in the hundreds right now. We have orders of magnitude more, total. We don't kind of give exact numbers, but, it's a very small portion of our user base, the total user base or Objective-C and Swift and Java bindings that have come out for far longer. And then that user base is pretty split 50-50. The rest is kind of split 50% native iOS and 50% native Java. And within iOS, we have about like close to 60% of it is Swift, and then 40% is Objective-C. So within React Native, there's definitely converts. There's kind of we used to get a lot of messages of people saying like, hey, I was using like Realm on iOS, but now I'm using like React Native, so like what can you do for me? Or like, is there a replacement? And so that was kind of pretty fun. There was a kind of steady stream of people kind of leaving even Swift and Objective-C and going towards React Native. Today I get the sense that there's a lot of like just novice people using Realm on React Native that come from either a web development, but no kind of mobile development background. There is some few kind of PhoneGap or whatever transplant. People are coming from other kind of JavaScript solutions. But interestingly, I'm seeing a lot of people come from let's say the cutting edge of iOS. A lot of people coming from Swift and coming from functional reactive programming and coming from those kind of background. There's some pretty famous example in the community of people kind of doing that. And we're definitely kind of seeing that too. So it's kind of interesting because it's not your usual like quote unquote JavaScript adoption, like PhoneGap or Accelerator. I feel like there's a lot of just native developers that go towards React Native because it kind of embodies the ideals that they have, and the adoption we're seeing for Realm is not different in that regard.
Yeah, I think it speaks pretty highly of the React Native movement because, you already have an iOS library, right? So if I'm writing an iOS application in React Native, you already have an iOS library. I could actually use that and have to write the bridge to talk to it, which is what we do with every iOS library that's out there. And most people don't bother trying to make it the entry level easier. So what encouraged you guys to take it one step further? Because you have an Android library and you have an iOS library. You could have just said, all right, guys, if you want to use it, just write your own bridge, or here's a bridge. And so how did that all come about?
Well, I think, we've all been there, having to do that, right, as developers, and kind of bridge into another language or bridge through like whatever layers of indirection you have between your framework and your platform underneath. And kind of, it always sucks. I mean, it's just always a really, really bad experience. And we could have just exposed, again, like a thin wrapper. And in some ways, that's how some of our implementation works, right? That we translate calls to kind of other parts of the system. But from an API standpoint, we really wanted to offer something that was much nicer. And then oftentimes from a performance standpoint, we have to do a lot more extra work. But that's just kind of part of what we want to be doing, right, with the product that we build.
Could I fill that in just a little bit with React Native specifically? Generally speaking, how you would write a native integration into React Native is you copy data across a bridge. So whether you're on Android or iOS, that's essentially how it works. It's asynchronous, and you send back messages that are essentially, encoded into JSON back and forth. And so for Realm specifically, it's maybe within the realm possibility, no pun intended, to do that, but there would be severe limitations. So doing a native integration for Realm makes even a whole lot more sense than, many other kinds of native modules where just using the React native bridge makes a lot of sense for them. With Realm, it's just an exception to that rule.
And maybe we should dive in a little bit on that, actually, because it might make a few people kind of geek out. But let's talk a little bit about like how that part of Realm works, because most languages we have to deal with are pretty straightforward in comparison to what we have to do for React Native. And then we'll circle back to like why we did it. I still want to answer that, but most languages pretty much work as you expect. We have a kind of C++ stored underneath, and we just kind of do calls into C++. So for Android, we go through Genie, right, and we use the NDK. And then for iOS, we use a lot of Objective-C++. So it's pretty straightforward bridging. But for React Native, we basically have to modify each JavaScript engine. So we're lucky for React Native that they chose to use JavaScript core on both iOS and Android, and they didn't rely on V8 or anything, or just whatever was built in, because we only had to modify JavaScript core once to kind of run the code that we needed to run, expose the object interface we wanted it to. But basically, that's kind of been the big holdup in us supporting like PhoneGap and other platforms as well, is because then we'd have to go and support a different version of Realm for devices that run V8 or any other JavaScript kind of platform one by one. So it's a pretty intense amount of extension we have to do, and it changes quite a bit from platform to platform. And as to why we did that instead of just doing a bridging, right? So the first answer I gave was just like, it's just not the kind of product that we do. And then the second one I would say is there's definitely this kind of ease, right? It's definitely easier for us to support React Native since it only uses JavaScript core underneath. It doesn't really let people like load whatever JavaScript engine might be running on their platform. And the third thing is that I think it was very well aligned with our ideals and kind of design pattern we want to follow. And we didn't really have to sacrifice a lot of our own kind of design to be able to build a product that we felt would be really compatible with the React Native community. Whereas, if we're looking at doing like a phone gap kind of product, I think we're going to have to tone down some of those patterns, support kind of other parts of the ecosystem and plug in, and it's drastically a more complicated product to build. So those are kind of some of the reasons why we went towards React Native and why we kind of went the extra mile in building like a true React Native product. As opposed to just telling people like, hey, good luck bridging directly into Objective-C or into Java.
Yeah, and like you said before, a lot of unlike PhoneGap in a way, a lot of developers are who are existing native developers, who have used Realm, are excited about React Native and about using React and building their apps and are moving, or at least experimenting with it. And so I think it made a lot of sense for Realm to kind of go there first, even before, somewhere like PhoneGap, because in a way that's where a lot of developers are going.
Yeah, and even towards like other platform, like say like Xamarin or something like that. I mean, these are all kind of communities that we have a ton of respect for, but when you take a time to kind of prioritize and take a look at where we thought the wind was blowing, right, what we thought was going to be hot in the next kind of 6 months, 6 years, and what we felt was really aligned with our own passion and goals, like I think React Native was a clear winner, and we felt that way for a very long time. So it's not to say that we're not going to support the other platforms eventually and come up with product for them. But as I said, I think the React Native community really gets what we're trying to do, and so far it seems like the adoption we're seeing seems to confirm that.
Yeah, I'll say a big plus for that stance is in our podcast and all the people we talk to, a lot of people come from web to React Native. They're familiar with React and they want to do mobile apps. This is a easier entry for them. And people with that background really struggle in the Objective-C or Swift code base side of it because it's so different. So by doing what you guys did without just making like write your own bridge if you want to use it kind of attitude, it definitely appeals to anybody from that camp that's coming from web to React Native, so they don't have to dive into the Objective-C code and send all these events and
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like being able to dive into kind of native code is a great strength of the React Native platform, and I think it's one of the things that I think was really kind of well designed about it, right? In terms of trying to shield you away from it, like a lot of other frameworks do. But I think it would be against the philosophy of React Native for us to require that you do that bridging whenever you have to do like data storage or model manipulation. I feel like really a travesty of that bridging ability. And I really personally feel that should be reserved to like really extremely necessary cases like UI, for example. That's a good one, or very native feature like the keychain or other thing like that. But even that, I think you can make a strong case for it being abstracted away into kind of much better high level interface. So I just think that just because it's there doesn't mean that we should force people to do it. That seems like that would just really be making a mockery of what the React Native team is trying to do at Facebook and outside Facebook.
I agree.
Lee, is there any other pressing things that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I would like to branch on just app architecture. So, I know that React Native obviously has Navigator, which does a lot of things for you, but the Flux, using Flux implementation in React Native applications is becoming more prevalent, with Redux and other things like that. So, could you guys describe where in an application architecture, typical application architecture, the Realm access would fall?
Yeah, so like Tim had mentioned kind of earlier, we see ourselves as in a way a replacement for the model layer, and with regards to something like Redux, it's a little trickier because Redux expects your models to be immutable and for your actions, your reducers to be pure. And so we are working on a better integration with that, because under the hood, since we are kind of diving deep into Realm architecture, it's what's called a write-only database. So it changes are made, just as writes that are versioned. So, we could have immutable representations of every point of the database as it changes. And we could make a really great integration with Redux using that. But until we kind of polish that out for React Native, there's some extra work you need to do for integrating with Redux in particular. But for, like what Tim said, we do really well integrating more reactive kind of patterns where, you watch for changes in the data and then you respond by re-rendering the parts of your UI that are, dependent on those parts of your data. And so right now, I would recommend, people look at that seriously as a great way to integrate Realm with your React Native projects.
Yeah, and as much as we're a fan of kind of the entire Flux architecture, and internally we're also kind of big fans of this immutable object type of trend that's happening. We're also seeing that for the wide majority of developers, this is a bit kind of a bit of a bridge too far in terms of like building apps with like the resources you have, the team that you have, the code that you have, the understanding of all those panels that you have, the time that you have, the customer leeway that you have to get that done. And so, I've seen multiple comments, including on Reddit, that, Realm is great because it doesn't force you to use Redux and follow all that stuff. So I think there's a bit of a pattern where, we try to encourage and we will definitely add features to Realm to really fit, I think the Flux pattern and Redux as well as we possibly can. But Realm also always tries to keep things very, very simple. And, it's like the distinction I was doing earlier between like functional reactive pattern, like reactive programming. We really believe in reactive programming with no pretense and nonsense and just kind of letting you do things the simple way. But we're not super eager to force people to use, more advanced reactive patterns like what Redux is doing, or like, again, a lot of the functional reactive programming you would see in community like Reactive Cocoa and Eric Swift and other projects. So we're not against that, but we're against forcing people to use those patterns to use our framework. We just think there's kind of, a bit of a place for everything and for different approaches and different teams.
There's no reason to even like bother with Redux though, right? Like Realm, you can almost compare it to something like Relay, right? Why would I want to use? Because I'm sure people will want to try doing this, but like, why would I want to use like Redux with Realm?
A much closer, I think, analog would be something like MobX, which I know is also kind of popular around the React community. So this is kind of the alternative that I kind of always think of. I haven't played too much with Relay, so I don't know, Scott, if you can take that part specifically.
Oh, I think that's a great analogy. Kind of liking, integrating React with Relay to integrating React with Realm. I think that's a great analogy, and I don't have anything particular to add to that. Like Redux, like a reason to use Redux. Like there are some good reasons to use Redux. So I'm not going to write it off completely. It is really cool. But when you're using Realm, there's less reasons, I would say, that you would want to use Redux. Not that, there still might be some like the time traveling, debugging and a lot more functional purity in all the different parts of your application.
Right. And since we've been going deep, maybe we can talk a little bit about, why we kind of make that sort of claim, because otherwise I feel like people might send us hate mail. So I think in general, like there's multiple schools of thought, but let's say like one that we have a lot inside of Realm is to say that a lot of these things, like immutable objects is a good example, but there's many other patterns like that in programming in general, specifically around databases, that are really like, when you think about it, like people don't want necessarily immutable object for the sake of it, right? It's not like, oh, you wake up in the day, you're like, oh, immutable object, that's so great, right? It's not like people want MapReduce either, for example, for databases, right? Those are kind of means to an end. It's a trade-off you make because it gives you really, really, really nice benefits. And so in the case of immutable objects, I think it makes a lot of concurrency conversations and consistency conversations very, very simple. And it has a way of simplifying kind of a lot of decisions and situations for you. And again, we're not trying to make the claim that Realm will fit all of these constraints. Again, we're big fans of mutable objects, and we're looking forward to adding that kind of thing into Realm. But we have made our own sort of trade-off to help you navigate consistency and concurrency, and that mostly revolves around, like, again, the transaction that we have for writes, and the way that we do memory management and reference management underneath, and the way that we use loops for refreshing your data state and everything else. And we try to give you states that again that are very, very manageable, with, we hope, less of a cognitive load than using immutable objects. So that's kind of maybe just to qualify Scott's statement a little bit. It's not like we do everything that the immutable paradigm promises to give you, but we feel like we do a lot of it at a much, much lower cognitive cost, for people, than having to kind of really drastically rethink your application or your data flows in this unidirectional kind of way. So that, I would say, would be our defense of the previous statements before we get to too many questions about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that all makes perfect sense. I think, Redux obviously was huge for React Web. You have these ginormous applications and all these actions, but mobile applications usually are and should be pretty singular focused, right? You don't want a mobile application that does everything in the kitchen sink. They just don't typically work. They're not very successful. So, those are all very, very good points for that. So I'm curious what you guys have in the future, either roadmapped out or maybe further reaching things you'd like to get to. What's the future of Realm?
Yes, a lot of what I'm going to say is actually in the open on GitHub, we're actually really open about the way we develop this and kind of feature we're considering. And so in general, I would say, if you're wondering what we're doing, just look at our GitHub issues and our tags. If you have any feature you really need, just, open up a GitHub issue, or if you have a question or a bug, open a GitHub issue or go on Stack Overflow, and we'll be on it usually within the day. Not even if it's a business day, considering the hours that we keep. So pretty much any time. But so the basic roadmap, kind of big thing that we want to get done, that we actually kind of were considering of doing before launch, but we ended up launching a bit earlier than planned, is async queries. We mentioned that earlier. It's not a strict necessity, but if you're dealing with very large data sets, or if you really insist in kind of building your apps in kind of very synchronous way, we're looking to do that pretty early. There's a lot of really kind of small features and kind of little bugs that we're trying to fix, little small documentation. We're trying to expose kind of more information around like migrations and schemas, so people can do more advanced use cases. Right now, I think what we have is kind of okay if you would just build applications, but if you're dealing with some complex kind of transition scenarios, or if you're trying to build a library that uses Realm, for example, it could be useful to get more information around kind of object schemas and have more manipulation that way, more ability to transform data as it's migrated. A lot more advanced queries, like checking that a member, or checking that you subscribe to a specific query results being changed, or a specific array membership being changed, and then soon after that a way to check a specific object, specific property being changed, and again what changed since you got a notification, which is really useful for animations and a bunch of other things. What else? I don't know. I'm just reading off or getting bored at this point, so I think I'll just let people kind of take a look at that. And again, if there's any question, they can talk to us. We're pretty accessible. And then beyond kind of React Native, as I said, we're really interested in the whole JavaScript ecosystem, including maybe Node.js support. There's a non-negligible kind of obstacle towards a lot of this stuff, as we mentioned, kind of supporting a lot of different JavaScript engines and packaging and a lot of other things. But we're pretty happy to kind of keep digging into the JavaScript ecosystem. In general, our priorities for all our products is still to kind of support people first, to do bug fixes second, and only to add features third. So we tend to go a bit slow in coming out with brand new features or brand new platforms. So we ask for people's patience, if they're really kind of waiting for something new from us. But we think that the way that we would like to be treated if we're depending on library, right? We would really want maintainers to be talking to us first before they do anything else, or fixing the bug before they look at adding anything new. So that's kind of a priority list going forward. So a lot of these changes might take a little while, but we hope people understand and agree with the priorities we're using.
Yeah, I would just like to add that, I mean, maybe for me personally, it's just, besides all that Tim said, which a lot of which is kind of feature parity with the other more mature language bindings. I would like, a few more deeper integrations with React Native, like we have with the list view, so that people can grab UI components out of Realm and integrate their Realm objects even more seamlessly. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah. And I'm really happy. I mean, I'm excited to see what's going to come out of the React Native community, because it's definitely kind of our fastest growing product ever. Even though, Android, has a much kind of bigger community, and of course, like native iOS, also a pretty large community. It started out much, much slower and smaller for us. And so it's going to be really fun to see, the community grow so quickly around the React Native product. And I'm kind of, excited to see what kind of features people need and what kind of bugs they hit, and what kind of integration we have to do. So I can't encourage people to speak up, enough, right, on our GitHub and say what they want. We're 100% feedback driven when we build these products. And, if you don't tell us what you need, like, we'll never get there. But if you tell us what you need, we'll jump on it pretty much. So we really need people to tell us, kind of what would make this the ideal, data model, right, for React Native, what will make them, happy and never thinking about using anything else. And they shouldn't assume anything about like what we want to do or what patterns we'll follow or what we won't do. They should really just speak up and let us know, because odds are, we're just in the business of building what you want us to be building. And that's kind of the magic of our product approach on this.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you. I mean, I really hope that people speak up and talk about, things that might be looking for. I'm going to give Realm a shot for a project that I'm currently working on and about to start the React Native build on. So maybe you'll even hear from me if there's some nice to haves.
Nice. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you guys want to go over?
I can't think of anything. Do you have anything, Scott?
Not anything I can think of. I think we covered.
We did a really thorough job. I don't think I've talked in like this much detail about Realm ever. I don't think our investors, got like so much of a look into what's happening inside. So
yeah. Well, I think our listeners really like that they're really interested in how it works, under the covers, and they tend to be get a little deeper than just, we'll install this and run that, because that gets you in trouble, obviously, if you just go with something you're not really sure what it does or how it does it, but it just claims to do it. So it's nice to hear the explanations. You guys gave great explanations.
No, thanks. I mean, that's kind of what we do. We know there's like a big kind of trust thing when you use a new library. And, we feel like a big way to kind of earn that trust is to just kind of be transparent about or motives or design patterns or philosophy or thought process. And, not, just because, we happen to think that we're right, but just because if we're wrong, that's the only way we're going to figure out if we're wrong about any of these things, right? If we talk about them out loud and people get to tell us how about this or how about that. So, that's always good to hear, but I'm happy it's well received here too.
And I think we both, Tim and I, really love talking about how it works. It's just, you don't always have, that opportunity to. So I'm glad we did here.
All right. So now we'll get into our final segment of React Native Radio, and that's picks for the week. Lee, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I'm going to pick the Realm browser because we didn't get to talk about it. And it's a really cool Mac OS X utility for giving you a visual of your Realm database that you're working with in your React Native application. And it's just a really cool way of getting a peek into the data without going through a bunch of crazy debug crap. that you usually have to do to see data. So check it out. They have a link to it on their Realm page. It's really awesome utility for development.
Oh, wow. This is so cool. I'm literally downloading it right now.
Yeah, and it's nice. And it's live too, right? So if you make changes in your app and you're running debug mode, you can kind of see a data change from under you directly in the Realm browser. So it's pretty sweet. We spend like a lot too much time maintaining that. So I'm glad when people notice. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a very, very cool tool. And I said we didn't get we got so deep into the Realm itself, we didn't get to really talk about it, but it's definitely worth mentioning. So that's my pick.
Yeah, that's a really good one. All right. For my pick this week, I'm going to go with the React Component Style Guide. Being a consultant lately, I have to do a lot of explaining to people naturally, right? Because you're building stuff and people have to use it besides you. So the React Component Style Guide basically lets you generate a style guide just off your components. So basically you're documenting your React components and it's building a static site that basically goes over your React components. It's really cool, and especially since humans are the bottlenecks in any engineering paradigm, it makes that a lot easier for me and the people that I've been working with.
Oh, I mean, if you guys can do picks, I have at least two to share. I mentioned it briefly, but a ton of respect for MobX and what they're trying to do there. I think it's like a super really nice kind of little framework, and I particularly like their documentation. I like how they explain everything about their philosophy and design patterns and maintain that very, very well. So I don't agree with everything that they're doing from a design standpoint, but I definitely have a ton of respect for that framework. Available, I think, for both React and React Native. So MobX.js, I think, is what it is on GitHub. And then a quick I guess side pick for the really nice TaskRabbit app that was an early Realm user and gave us tons of feedback. So I think it's a bit of an easy pick because people can't actually download it. It's the app for taskers, so it's behind the registration wall. But the TaskRabbit guys, I know they were on the show a few weeks back. They did a really amazing job, kind of betting on Realm and giving us tons of feedback and telling us what was broken and really kind of running us through the paces. And so I always want to plug them to anyone who's looking for a good job or a good example of how to use React Native in production and how to get that into a pretty major app by a pretty big startup. So that's going to be my pick 1A or 1B.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm happy I found out about MobX because it looks really cool.
Yeah, so I guess my picks would be the Jest testing suite framework. I don't know exactly what you would call it, but Jest is maintained at Facebook by my friend Christoph, and he's been really responsive to the whole community and trying to make Jest the best possible framework for writing tests for React and React Native applications. And he's made sure that it has worked well with Realm, and we'll continue to fix bugs and make it better there. So I wanted to give that a plug. And also I just saw this the other day, and maybe it was yesterday. I haven't had a chance to play with it yet since I've been on vacation, but it looked really cool. It was I believe it was called React Storybook, is a way of developing your UI, your React UI components kind of in isolation. And I believe it was more built for React for the web than React Native, but it looked like a really cool way to design your UI components. So those are my picks.
Cool. Sounds great. Unless anyone has anything else they'd like to mention, I think we'll wrap it up here.
I mean, I want to thank you guys because, as we mentioned kind of on the side, it's very, very rare that we get to talk into a lot of depth about Realm and go into so much detail. And I'm really glad that there's a place that exists where people can have really technical conversation like this. I was afraid this was going to be another conversation of talking in marketing speak at a very high level about user features, but it was really nice to be able to go into a lot of detail and thanks to you guys for doing a show like this. I think it's really rare, and I'm glad there's a place for this in the React Native community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming on. I mean, we definitely, every one of us on here are developers, so we don't really care about the marketing speak. We want to know how it works.
Exactly.
It's nice. It's nice. We need more of that in all languages and frameworks. So
I agree. Thank you, guys.